and welcome to Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and today's episode is brought to you by our featured patron, Jeff Lucas. Thank you, Jeff.
What's up, Jeff?
Today, we are telling the story of a band, Tony. A band that everyone and no one has heard of. Today, we're going to be talking about Threatin. And as a point of order, before we get started with the story, I'm going to point out that Threatin is spelled Threatin.
That's just creative license that I can approve and fully endorse.
It's not a bad band name, Tony. We're going to say some bad things about these people, but if we're talking about the quality of the name of the band, it could be worse.
It could be. They could be like tampon spelled with an I.
It would just be Tampin.
Yep, exactly.
In November of 2018, a band named Threatin was scheduled to play at the Underworld in Camden. The alternative music venue had booked the band because the band claimed they had pre-sold 291 tickets to the show.
It's not a bad start.
No, it's not, Tony. And despite the fact that no one at the Underworld had heard of Threatin before, a simple Google search would have led them to a Facebook page with thousands of followers and a YouTube channel with tons of views and comments. They would have also found the band's website, which pointed out that they had won several awards, including the Top Rock Artist of the Year award from Top Rock Press. Threatin took the stage at the appointed time and did their approximation of rocking out. But there's a twist, Tony. Those 291 people who had supposedly bought tickets to this show were not in the room. In fact, the room was almost entirely empty. Aside from the people who were there to help the band set up their equipment, exactly 3 people showed up to see the, quote, Top Rock Artist of the Year, Threatin, live in concert.
Those 3 people are pretty damn dedicated, though.
I do wonder what their story is, if they were legitimately fans of Threatin, one of the very few in the world who genuinely were excited that Threatin was coming to their town. Threatin's next appearance at the Exchange, a music venue in Bristol, was similarly underwhelming. And so people started to ask questions. The venues that had been booked by Threatin only to have no customers show up started posting on social media, angry at being duped. And so people started digging into Threatin's history. And what they found was a huge mountain of lies. The YouTube views were fake. The Facebook followers were bought. And the deception went even deeper than that. The website for the company responsible for booking Threatin's European tour was full of plausible but ultimately fake band names. Threatin was the only actual band they represented, and Threatin's music label, Superlative Music Recordings, handled the publishing rights for exactly the same list of fake bands and Threatin.
These guys went deep.
And, coming as a shock to literally no one at this point, Top Rock Press, the publication that had awarded Threatin the Top Rock Artist of the Year award, turned out to be completely fictitious as well.
Man, did you know, like, I can't believe that we won that, like, greatest podcast ever award so many years ago from, like, Podcast Magazine. It's great.
I know, and the fact that they're even writing about podcasts in a print-only magazine is pretty unbelievable, but you can still find a copy if you go to your local library.
Yeah, they've got it all archived. You could probably get it on microfiche. You'll have to look real hard for it, though.
As these lies came to light, things within the band started to go badly. Threatin, as it turned out, was mostly just one guy, a musician who called himself Jared Threatin. In his YouTube videos, he played all the instruments for every song, but to go on tour, he actually needed to have a band, so he hired backup. Guitarist Joe Pranera was shocked when he got the call from Aligned Artist Management asking him if he'd be interested in touring with the band Threatin in Europe. Prunera had a grand total of 7 subscribers to his music channel on YouTube, so the fact that anyone had even heard of him seemed like success.
I'd be so skeptical. Like, if I only had 7 subs on there, it was like, yeah, that's not enough of anything for any reason. Not to go on a European tour anyway.
Well, I read quite a few interviews with several of the people who worked with this band, and all of them seemed relatively young, so somewhat naive, and also seemed like they were relatively hardworking. This particular guitarist had to go to an audition. He wasn't the only one they contacted, and they asked these people to learn 2 different songs to play with Threatin so that they could figure out if they were any good, and he went to the trouble of learning 9 of Threatin's songs.
That's ambitious. I like that drive.
He was working hard, and I think he saw this as, somebody who probably was up and coming. Obviously, no one had heard of Threatin, but there's a lot of bands in the world that you haven't heard of that are real bands, and someone's paying to see them. So he thought, hey, listen, I've been working hard on my guitar playing. Sure, I don't have a big presence on social media, but I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm just going to work my butt off and make this opportunity to pay off.
I mean, worst case scenario, you get to say you were paid to go on a European tour, and that's pretty awesome.
That's very awesome, and that's a huge factor in what plays into this. All 3 of the other people in the band get contacted by this person, Lisa Golding, who, after the emails get sent out from Aligned Artist Management, mysteriously disappears, but they all have this drive to do something bigger in the music industry, and if you can say, hey, I've toured in Europe with this band Threatin, I'm pretty legit, it seems like a good thing to have on your musician's resume, even if it doesn't pay that well or if it's not the most glamorous gig in the world. Obviously, in hindsight, all of these guys kind of regretted the decision, but I don't know that you can dock them that many points for making the mistake that they made.
And honestly, by now, because of all this press, their profiles are bigger.
That's fair, yes. The pay wasn't going to be much. $300 plus expenses. And it turned out that expenses didn't include food. So Jared Threatin gets in contact with these guys. He said, listen, we're going to go on tour. I'm going to pay you $300 plus room and board. Apparently Jared Threatin doesn't know what board means, but he does pay for their airfare and for their hotel lodgings, and gives them $300 that they're going to have to cover the entire trip's expenses with. I don't know how much food costs in Europe, but I would imagine that a several-week tour is going to cost you more than $300 in food.
Yeah, it's like you're not going to the grocery store. You're not buying ramen.
Yes, and this is not evident to them until they get there, that he's actually kind of stiffing them on the food thing. So at least one of these guys ends up dipping into his own personal stash in order to stay on this tour, because the $300 goes pretty quick. When the band first started playing to empty venues, the other members thought that it was a little strange, but Jared started blaming the low attendance on a mistake made by the promotion company. He essentially said, guys, I don't know what's going wrong here. There must be something wrong with the people who said that they were going to promote us. I was expecting a sold-out show, and the fact that they're not here is just completely baffling to me. And he gives this excuse to the venues themselves as well. Like, these people are not just in the business of you paying them money so that you can get up on the stage and rock out to nobody. They actually want a crowd there so they can sell them drinks and stuff. In one case, they go up to Jared and demand $1,000 to cover their expenses, and he does pay up. Despite all of this shenanigans, Jared Threatin seems to have a pretty good attitude about all of his weirdness. That's maybe one of the best things I can say about him.
I mean, he just tried to back engineer a way in. Like, and I can understand the drive to do that, it just doesn't work.
There's video of at least one of these performances to an empty house, and it's worth noting that the band itself doesn't sound half bad. I'm not the greatest judge of this because I don't go out and listen to local bands play very often. I don't know what kind of music people who would expect to play to just a couple hundred folks in a little venue would be making, but they're not like the worst. The music itself is pretty mediocre, but the musicianship at least is competent.
I mean, that's one way to describe it. Like, I listened to a little bit of their stuff, and I would say competent is about as accurate as you're going to get. It's nothing special, but it's also not, like, the worst. It's something you'd expect to see, like, in an 80s movie where, like, people are running through, like, Ninja Turtle style, and you've just got, like, something going on in the background.
It feels, at least some of the songs feel like the Asylum version of real rock and roll songs. Like emo metal. I don't know if that's a thing.
Emo metal is just goth.
Okay. I don't know. I haven't also talked about Jared Threatin himself yet. This dude he looks younger than I think he actually is. He has very long hair, like almost down to his waist. He's frequently posing in these very stereotypical rock and roller kind of poses. He's got one shot where he's wearing a leather jacket and no shirt underneath, and he's sort of looking at the camera kind of menacingly, but also like, I'm so sexy, don't you know it, babe? And holding his guitar in some kind of way. He's, again, sort of like the parody of a guy who got excited about rock and roll and thought that he could make rock and roll. Once outside media started recording on this quote-unquote fake band, the people who were in the fake band started to realize what was going on. And they confronted Jared with the accusation that he was faking his popularity. Jared himself deflected, claiming that he was a victim of his record label's mismanagement. But when the other band members said that they were quitting anyway, he accepted their resignation with good grace. He wasn't throwing a fit or yelling or screaming at them. He said he understood, and they walked out the door, and that was that.
I mean, you can't really expect them to give you any loyalty after lying to him like that.
Well, you can't expect it, but if we're talking about the kind of person who is willing to build an entire fictitious universe of media around himself so that he can prop up his vision of rock stardom, what you expect is not necessarily very helpful in making a calculation about how this guy's going to act. Threatin's European tour was essentially over, but the story of the fake social media popularity and elaborate lies was just taking off. Despite being initially dug up by the website metalsucks.com, which, by the way, is where I got a lot of the sources for this material. They have extensive coverage of Jared Threatin and his band and his family. Those guys went whole hog for Jared Threatin. The story was eventually picked up by more prominent publications like The Guardian and the New York Times. Jared Threatin, it turns out, was actually named Jared Eames. He had originally been in a band with his brother Scott Eames, but apparently craving more of the limelight had decided to strike out on his own without much success. And I read an interview with his brother. Now, this is obviously going to be somewhat biased, right? This is Scott Eames' side of things. But considering that Jared is a complete liar, I don't know that we could necessarily trust his version of events either. But Scott Eames essentially said him and Jared and another guy were in a band together back in 2012, and they were doing okay, but Jared just didn't like sharing the attention with the other members of the band, and in fact lied about his contributions to their first album, where he said that he did things on the record that he didn't actually do. And so he and Scott split up, and Scott went on to do his own things, and Jared wandered out to California to try to make it on his own. And there's a great backstory here of these two brothers who were interested in music, very interested in guitar, and Scott Eames described their early history as musicians and talked about how they pushed each other in trying to learn how to play the guitar, where Scott was the first guy to learn and Jared started picking it up and really started getting good to the point where Scott said, I'm not going to get beat by my younger brother. I'm going to step up my game. And it seems like these two guys for a while were really good for each other until Jared decided to get the ego and want to be the only thing in the room.
That's just unfortunate.
It is. There's also a little bit of backstory that I don't have much information on, but there is a post from several years ago on Jared's Facebook where his father has replied and said, if anyone knows anything about where we can contact Jared, we would love to talk to him. He hasn't been in contact with us for several years. So this is a man who has completely cut himself off from his blood family. And we don't know why, for sure. It could be some fault of his own, or it could be some other falling out that they've had. But regardless, it seems like kind of a sad story.
Yeah, it's like Aaron Rodgers from the Green Bay Packers. He's done the same thing. He just like fully cut his family out.
In an interview Scott Eames gave about his brother's fake tour, he predicted, quote, I know him well enough that he's going to try to turn this into it all being an elaborate hoax, and that he was the mastermind of that too. I know that's what he's going to pull. End quote. The same day, Jared Threatin tweeted, quote, what is fake news? I turned an empty room into an international headline. If you are reading this, you are part of the illusion. Hashtag marketing, hashtag psychology, hashtag social media, hashtag fake news, hashtag threaten, hashtag breaking the world, hashtag music industry.
I mean, if you're already caught, you might as well just lean into it at this point.
He also tagged Joe Rogan, BBC News, and Rolling Stone in this tweet.
And the thing is, I've already heard Joe Rogan talk about this a little bit, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up on there. I don't think he wants that, though, because Rogan is not the type of guy that would put up with anyone's like crap like this.
It's such a bummer story, though, because there's a subsequent interview that Scott Eames gave after, he found out about his brother doing the what is fake news tweet, and said, it is my opinion that with the same amount of effort and money, of which I'm sure he's borrowed a lot, there's no doubt in my mind with his talent he could have done something in a legitimate and respectable manner. Instead, he's gone the route of manipulation and deceit. While he may try to spin all of this as an elaborate hoax of sorts, I can assure you, knowing my brother, that this indeed was a failed attempt at entering the music industry. End quote. And another thing Scott Eames said, I don't have the exact quote right here in front of me, but he said he thinks Jared is legitimately a great guitar player, especially a great bass player. He said he rivals anyone that he knows, and Scott Eames himself is on the road trying to make it as a musician. Now, I'll point out, Scott Eames' brand of music is not my particular cup of tea. He's part of a band called Thy Antichrist, which is offensive to me on several levels. Should be thine, and I'm not a fan of the Antichrist, but at least he's out there actually playing the guitar and growing a little bit at a time, and possibly that's what set all this off. If you think about the competition these two brothers had, it's not unlikely that Jared looks over at his brother, sees that he's finally starting to live the dream that they had both shared for a while, and Jared himself is stuck in neutral, and he decides, well, maybe I can fake it till I make it. And he faked it a little too hard.
Yeah, and he set out about it entirely on his own, too. It seems like that's, like, if he would have had some other people around him, he might have been able to make something real. It's just weird.
Not entirely on his own. And this
he
is
bought people, but I'm saying, like, to have, like, actual friends and an actual band with him that's helping him.
You're right about the band thing, but the most fascinating thing to me about this story was something I didn't find out about until today. When I was researching this, I realized that Jared Threatin is married and has been for 8 years. There's some posts from his wife on Instagram, and she seems kind of like the type of girl who's trying to be a model out in California. I can't tell exactly. She has a lot of just sort of very flattering pictures of herself and doing various different normal seeming things. And she just has a post where it's her and Jared sitting down together, and she says, thanks for being a great husband and the love of my life, and you've supported me and I'm supporting you, and we're on this journey together. And it really completely flipped my thinking about this dude who before I was ready to completely dunk on. And he deserves it to a point. Like, he deceived people. He's a liar in the most obvious sense of the term. And yet he's managed to keep a relationship going for 8 years, which is not easy. If he was the complete jerk that I want to believe that he was at the beginning of this story, then you would think that he would have pushed somebody like that away by now, but he's done something to get her on his side. So it's a weird situation where we get like a piece of someone's life through reporting in social media, and it's impossible to know all of the layers that they have. And it's very likely that there is simultaneously a decent person and a rotten person all tied up inside of Jared Threatin.
I'd say it's probably more a desperate person than a rotten person from what you're saying.
Potentially, yes. I'm less inclined to just want to dunk on him, though, knowing a little bit more about his personal life. It just makes me feel kind of sad for him. And you can respect a certain amount of feeling like, well, I can hustle my way into this. For any starting out band or venture, there is always going to be that making yourself look a little bigger than you are, talking a big game so that you can get in the door at some places that maybe you shouldn't be, but just so you can prove yourself. And Jared just looked at that and said, well, if that's acceptable, why don't I just build everything out of nothing? And
yeah,
you can't do that.
Yeah, you can only go so far without that actual backing. It's like you can get some good spots, but not that far.
But that's the bad idea for today, Tony. Lying.
Yes, lying about an entire tour, a lifestyle, how big your band is, and basically everything else you could think of.
We hope that you've enjoyed this show. We are not lying about our followers, because we don't have that many. We have not paid for one single Facebook follower. Pity us.
We have not. I have traded some follows, like 3 or 4, where people are like, oh, if you like my stuff, I'll get it. It's like, okay, whatever. But anyway, I hope you guys have an excellent week. We will see you with more bad ideas. Hit us up at badideashow@gmail.com if you have bad ideas, and we will talk to you soon.
Bye.